Why is payment processing so expensive? When you look at many businesses out there, thinking about grocery stores, fuel stations, these businesses often have a profit margin of 10% or less in their business, meaning for every $100 in revenue that they bring in, they're only making 7, 8, 9, $10 out of 100 in profit. The rest of that money is going to keep the lights on. It's going to pay employees. It's going to buy inventory or buy fuel or buy produce. These are just real expenses. And so for a business owner, they bring in $100 and they're lucky to keep, for a grocery store, they're lucky to keep $3 out of that or $4. Well, all of a sudden, when we look at that in context with payment processing, it really is staggering how expensive payment processing is. In fact, most businesses, if you look at their profit and loss report, their expenses, if you take out payroll, the next highest expense is usually either rent or payment processing. Those two end up being usually pretty close to each other. And so a business owner is literally paying as much money to the payment processing company as they are usually on the lease on their building. And so it's very expensive. You look at that $100 in like a grocery store. Well, if that grocery store is paying 2%, 3% in payment processing fees, well, out of that $100, they only have about $10 left. Well, then they have to pay 2 or 3 of that 10, 20, 30% of their total margin is going to payment processing. And so while these percentages in some ways might seem small to you, think, oh, what's 2%? What's 3%? What you have to understand is the business owner isn't making all of the money that comes in, right? All that revenue that comes in is just revenue. It's not profit. Once you actually take all the expenses out, you realize that out of that $100 transaction, even a really good profitable business might be bringing in $20 out of 100, so a 20% profit margin, but they're still paying $3 of the 20 in credit card processing fees. And so when you think of it in that context, it's like, wow, this is really expensive. And so why is it so expensive today? So I really think this is such a key concept to understand when we're talking about cash discounting, because it's really the primary reason that these programs have become so popular. So what you have to understand is in the U.S. market, the payments industry started out very much as a free market. Business owners really didn't have to accept these cards. It wasn't a huge competitive disadvantage to not accept them. Some of them did accept the cards, some of them didn't. If you did accept the cards, you had to pay the fees, and so makes sense, right? It totally makes sense. And the fees also made a lot of sense because it was very expensive to process credit card payments. Again, there was a lot of administrative work. Everything wasn't automated and digitized the way that it is today. So why is it that today the payment processing fees charged by the card brands and the banks are actually growing? They've actually grown every year for 10 years straight. The rates have increased. So the financial burden on business owners, what they've had to pay in order to accept payments, has actually increased every year for the last 10 years. As automation and digitization have become more prevalent, why is that possible? Wouldn't you think it would be more efficient to move money? Yes, it is more efficient. One of the best ways that you can see proof of that is when we look at the payment processing costs in other countries. So one of the primary costs in the industry is something called an interchange fee, okay? I'm not going to dive into all the details of it in this training program. It's not necessary. But an interchange fee is the fee that the issuing bank charges. So the bank that actually issues the card. If you reach in your wallet right now and you pull out your card, whether it's a debit card or a credit card, that was issued by a bank, okay? Some kind of a banking entity issued that card and is backing it up and has the money so you can spend the money. Whether it's your money or their money, they've got money that you can spend, right? So there's that bank, and whenever you spend money, there is something called interchange fees that are kept from that transaction. Now, in the U.S. market, just the interchange fees, that's not the card brand fees, that's not fees in the processing companies, that's just one type of fee, the interchange fee, averages 1.7%. I believe it's actually now getting closer to 1.8% in the U.S. market. Now, this is what's staggering. Obviously, the U.S. market, we do more credit card processing than any other country. And yet, when you look at other countries like over in, for instance, the European Union, over in the UK, you look at Australia, you look at Canada, you're going to see interchange fees that range anywhere from 0.2% all the way up to maybe 0.8%, but definitely below 1% around the world in all of the other developed countries. And yet in America, where we do the highest volume of transactions, it's 1.7, 1.8%. Why is that, right? You would think it should be low. So the question is, why is this happening? Why is it so high? Why are the fees so much? And the reason is actually pretty simple. We've gotten to a place where it's really no longer a free market anymore when it comes to credit card processing. So all of these other countries, they've actually regulated the cost of payment processing. Almost every other developed country either has, the government has negotiated with Visa and MasterCard to lower the rates, or they've actually just made laws and regulated these rates all around the world. America hasn't done that because we operate on a free market principle. If people don't want to pay something, well, then they just say no to it and they don't pay it. If I go to a store and I see an item on the shelf and I think it's too expensive, I just don't buy it, right? So we don't need to regulate that price because that's a free market. And we've looked at it that way in America, but what's happened is Visa and MasterCard and Discover and American Express, these companies, along with the big banks that back them up, have become so powerful that they really have almost a monopoly on this, and it's really locked into the point where, as a business owner, for you to not accept Visa and MasterCard, that is a huge problem for you. That is going to materially damage your business. You have to accept these forms of payment, right? And so because you have to accept them, and because Visa and MasterCard are really not competitors as much as they are collaborators anymore, and they kind of work together to make sure that they're not undercutting each other, we really have a situation where these brands are kind of, working together. And, it's really a situation where the merchant is getting taken advantage of because these big banks and the card brands say, hey, we're going to keep raising the cost of payment processing because what are they going to do? Are they not going to accept our form of payment? They have to. And so it's no longer a free market. Business owners feel like they can't say no. They can't say, well, I'm not going to accept payments, even though they hate the fees. Every business owner out there thinks they're paying too much to process credit card payments. And they think it's a kind of a ridiculous thing. I've got to just move money electronically. Why is it so expensive? And yet they really can't do anything about it because they can't stop, accepting these forms of payment. How do we solve this problem? Well, many of you already got ahead of me and you know the answer to the problem, and that is cash discounting. Cash discounting, and we'll talk much more about it in the next module, is going to allow these business owners to give the customer that power of choice. So we're back to a free market again. If the customer doesn't want to pay the fee, then they don't use their credit card, right? It's very simple. Now we're back at a point where the business owner can say, hey, we accept Visa, we accept MasterCard, we accept Discover, but there's a lower rate if you pay with cash. And so for the consumer, now the consumer that's getting all the benefits, they are now the ones that are going to be paying for those benefits. So now business owners are no longer going to be paying these percentage and per item fees anymore. And instead, they don't have to pay those fees. That money can go to the bottom line and they can pass that on to the consumer. So why is payment processing so expensive? The reason is because big companies like Visa, MasterCard, and the big banks have become so powerful. They've created almost a monopoly of sorts where no matter how much they increase the rates, business owners feel like they have to continue accepting these forms of payment. And as a result, business owners are starting to feel kind of trapped by this model, and they're looking for a way to regain control over their cost structure, and cash discounting is an incredible way to make that happen.